All right, we're talking about flow state today. There are lots of videos out there that talk about this. We're going to have a slightly different take on it. We're happy to have Mondo with us again today. My primary experience with flow is when you're riding the edge of disaster, but not in a way that is uncontrolled. It's in a way where you can harness it, you can ride that edge, and danger is imminent, but you're still able to, without fear, embrace that movement. And so it's that I primarily first encountered this. Also, when I'm in that creative act as a developer, so sometimes I'm busy coding away, and I'll look down and decide that I've finally coded up what I wanted, and not really have a sense of how I got there. And as I've had a chance to review other people's experiences with flow, the creative state, it resonated with me a lot. And we've briefly touched base on this in some of our conversations about shamanism and what have you, but we thought we should get into it in much more detail, especially our experiences with flow state, what it means for us. Lucas, I know that this has been something you've experienced quite a bit in your life. What is it, primarily in climbing is when you experienced this first, or when you got to know it best?
I mean, everything from reading to, I played volleyball a lot before I was a climber. Um, in all aspects of my life, I should say, at a young age, reading, I would discover that I could let go of focus and have a very different experience in absorbing information and letting my mind wander around. And so when I embarked in other interests in my life, playing volleyball, climbing, especially climbing, taking long nature walks in the Southwest, etc. It has always been interesting to me that if we let go of focus, then we have a capacity to absorb information. Sometimes I say peripherally, sometimes I say contextually. To me, there seems to be just a wider an ability to absorb a wider experience in the world. Um, but that's what I call flow. So I find it in all sorts of aspects of my life.
Yeah, I'm
Mondo,
jiving with that. I'm jiving with that. Like, I mean, flow is like the way I look at it. You were saying kind of, you started out saying that it's like that danger place, but then you overcome it because you find, I don't know, a competency and a capacity to stay in a place that you're perfectly safe, even though if you weren't in that space, and the bone games goes into that a little bit. It's like when and we've all had that experience where you're in a state where you're in a flow state, but for a second you think in a different way, and then you're not there anymore. And you really, when you get to build that competency to stay in that state, particularly when you're like climbing or something like literally is like death defying, or a payment to pay if you don't stay in that state, right? You're either not going to get the point, or you're going to crash, or you're not going to keep moving. And so reality is, all human experience, we're always in that state, right? We're always in a place where, there's some kind of so learning how to stay in a flow state will benefit you in everywhere you can go. Everything you do, you're going to be better off if you can get into that state. And that state is where the way I see it is in it, what I call is balance flow. It's like balance flow, dynamic balance is what I call. So and the simplest way to see where you would build that capacity would be, imagine moving barefoot over a very complex terrain. It's like you've got to be there. Every footfall is kind of almost like a chess move. So the natural state of a human being is moving through complex territory with a very vulnerable foot. Of course, you can have coverings and things like this, but your default state is such that you've got to, at one and the same time, tune into yourself, tune into your environment, and actually make moves that allow that process to become flowing, enjoyable. And that state, everyone knows it when they're there. How to find it more? The balance sports, which you basically, by the way, no one can help you get in a flow state, in the sense like you got to do the work. And I think balance sports are very much like that, because no one can tell you you're balanced. You have to find that out. You got to find where that is. There's no one can do the work for you. So flow states are just like something that It's about autonomy too. It's about taking control over the vehicle you're in and doing something with it that's feeding you. And you know when you're there. It's like you know when you're there. And helping people
I,
have that experience is what I'm all about.
I love that description. One of my first like visceral experiences with this was very similar to what you're describing. The connection with movement, feet, and somewhat being in danger, but not too far that you fall into fear or despair. Like I think that that's kind of some of the critical aspects. So I'm climbing the collegiate peaks in Colorado, and I find myself out of water, top of the mountain, and I need to get down. And there's a couple ways I can slowly hike down and kind of make my way, but it's getting to be dark, and I'm not necessarily in a good position to try to get down slowly. And there's a scree fall that's right next to the mountain, and for whatever reason, I found myself on a falling bed of rock. You know, like this is loose rock, and I'm sort of just like navigating down it by jumping between pieces of it, and the whole thing is kind of coming down with me. So if I stop, the rock will sort of encase me and probably, you know, cause me great harm. But if I kind of stay fluid on top of it, and I stay in the zone, then I'll be down and I'll be fine. And that's the most visceral thing that I remember, and it so resonates with everything you just said because it's connected with movement. There's an element of danger. There is a sense that you could control it, but that you need to sort of succumb and fall with it. And then you're entering into a mental state where you need hyper focus to stay in the moment, to be present, and to, you know, save your life, but also just to live your life. So that flow state of connection with movement and somewhat slight danger, it totally resonates with a personal experience that I've had the first time I experienced it, that I can really remember being in it.
Well, the old skateboard days, I'm telling you, man, I'm in a taste of like, I mean, I had to gain my flow with real trauma, okay, and drama, because the skateboard world came. We suddenly had urethane wheels. No one had them before. And then there was also in the late 70s in California a drought. So there was a lot of dried out swimming pools. And it didn't take long for us to put two and two together and start trying to figure out how we can do this. Now, I really think flow state is also very much connected to music and musicality. Good music generally is not staccato. You know, it's like it's got flow to it too, right? Life, music, and then these things that we love to do have all of those elements. The danger is real though, and until you develop, and so therefore you can, like, the skateboarding world was very equal access, right? Skateboarding is was like, if you've got a skateboard, we don't, and you have competency, it doesn't matter where you're from, rich, poor, whatever color, whatever thoughts. Your competency tells the whole story about what you're capable of doing. And that's the other aspect of flow state. Not only do you get it when you're in it, but think about this. Because of mirror neurons, watching people in a flow state is enjoyable. It puts you into the flow state too, right? Am I right on that?
Absolutely.
It's infectious. It's infectious, and especially in proximity. I think you can get it from a recording, but I think you get it even more if you are physically near it and you're able to experience it. And sometimes this can come about when you're in a mass of humanity, like at a concert too. The music is flowing, the whole crowd is kind of pushing, and you can get into that same kind of a mental dynamic in
Oh
that
yeah.
same sense as well.
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, being in the moment.
Yeah, but
Well,
to develop that competency takes some knocks, right? That's why the people who go rise higher in some of the sports or activities, there we can, those of us who are in that sport can really even more understand and appreciate what they're doing, because we understand they've probably not like been great right from the get-go. They had to overcome many kinds of obstacles. But once you've developed that mastery, right? The knocks are less, the falls, the problems, you're, and it, like, literally you start expanding, like I call it bonus points. When you're in a flow state, you are literally giving yourself bonus, all the scars and the problems you had, you're tearing those away, and then you start building reserves. And I think both, all of us here, we've built reserves of our flow states. Those become the stories that become flow state stories, right? And so it's like, more, I say the people, whatever you can do, they're often wondering why do I get I feel like I'm wasting my time. I'm just walking and enjoying nature. I'm just climbing. No, you're building up reserves so that world and all your you have like this, you're not you haven't you've you've lived life, so you've built up many people when they're frustrated, depressed, they feel like they've lost something. They don't. Well, flow states, you can build that up. You can overcome that fear, that trauma.
There's something else too about flow states that you guys are touching on that I think about a lot, and that is, some people find it easier to find a flow state when they're doing something alone. But as we talk about observing people who um, are are performing in a sport at a very high level, it's easy to see that when inserted in a group of people who are playing a sport at a high level, people level up more quickly. But there's also an understanding that some people get at some point that other people don't want you to fail, they want you to succeed. And when you accept that, it's amazing as to how that opens up the door. And this can be an opponent in a playing field. um, this can be some somebody who's climbing the same route as you. But I see this sort of dichotomy between the experiences that people are having all the time, and I faced it myself for a long time in sports, in climbing, in different pursuits uh, when I was an adolescent. And I don't know what age I was when I crossed that threshold. I thought the world was against me, but at some point I thought, oh no, the world wants me to succeed. And at that point, it was it was much easier for me to enter a flow state.
Right, right. Well, video games are very flow statey for people, right? People get into and coding, like you were saying. But back to me, really, skateboarding became the thing only because I we felt we were like we knew we got something no one had before. I mean, I'm not. There's lots of different ways to get to flow state, but I'm telling you, for a young person in the 70s to suddenly have urethane wheels and have dried swimming pools, and to do what was called a fakie, where you're like, you literally start going back and forth, that sort of rhythmic movement like that. To master that was just so delightful that I mean, I'm literally still trying to, like, that music captured me so strongly that 50 years later I'm still, like, trying to tune it better. I often say when people see me skateboarding now, by the way, my flow state's really now primarily focused on me alone, really. I'm not, because the sport I've picked, which is primarily skateboarding and other flow sports like that along, they are really just for me these days, really singularly for myself. I know people are seeing me and enjoying it, but I don't see anybody else. I mean, I don't, when I'm in that state, I'm not trying to I just get into this state and I stay there. I try to stay there as long as possible. And I find that uh, the flow of the skateboard, of the movement, of the all of that. And then when people ask me, when I finally stop and I'm in such a good mood, and somebody will ask me, they've maybe seen me or something, I start talking and I realize, like, I say, oh yeah, this skateboard's like a Stradivarius, and a Stradivarius violin is not going to be useful for anybody if they don't have some competency in that skill. So I'll hand it to them; they wouldn't be able. But when you have some competency and you built some mastery over something, then the object needs the person. It in and of itself, it doesn't do anything like a skateboard or a rock or whatever. It's just there. But when the mastery comes when a human being sort of embodies it, takes it, and makes it happen. And then everybody knows, because they know what a human being's experience is like, and they know what that thing that they're using is like. But when you put it together, something happens and everybody knows it. And the person doing it knows it the most. If nobody else understood, that'd be fine. But it's great that we can understand. We somehow can empathize and understand when other people are in a flow state, and we appreciate it, honor it, and hold it up.
You know,
I
there's
think
there's Go ahead, Grant.
I think the one thing that we're all very much saying is this is experiential in nature. Like it is critical that you can't just read about it and then try to enter it. Like the most important thing, if you're trying to tap into this, if you've never experienced it, or if you're trying to understand what we're talking about, it is experiential. That is key. So I've personally, related a story, but I've found this in many different sporting activities. And it's not that sports necessarily will draw it out, but I think it's because you're having to connect with something that is different from just standing still. So we've said experiential and movement. So I've found this like skiing, snowboarding, skateboarding. Talked about kind of going down that mountain. I've experienced this running down a mountain where I just like you said with barefoot running, where every step is a chest move. It's similar, even if you've got boots on and you're running down a mountain, because you're at a high enough speed and a high enough clip that you're falling with the ground. The ground is aiding you going down, but you have to step precisely, because a misplaced step and you're going to tumble, you're going to roll, you're going to hit hard, and you're probably going to take some shots and take some damage. And so that element of danger and experience, movement, running, all of these things, I think, combine together into drawing your attention into a laser focus that is, there is somewhat preservation of self and life can be a part of it. Because definitely when you're skateboarding, I mean, if you do the wrong move, you're gonna fall. You're gonna fall hard. You're probably gonna, like, if you're moving at clip, you're gonna eat the ground badly, and that's the dues you gotta pay. So I
Yeah,
think that
it's the
there's
dues, yeah, for
yeah.
sure. I mean, Lord have mercy, it's the dues you have to pay if you don't stay. And but in the end, it's the flow state is taking all of your energy, but it's not overtaxing you, right? You're, in other words, you're not wearing out. That's the other thing. You've reached some kind of threshold. It's like that middle ground, that edge. I think the boundary. And if you can get there and preserve it, it's also not taxing you. In other words, some hard work, something that really requires a lot of labor fit. Oh, you'd be worn out quickly, right? It would be, but a flow state, and we talked about this on the last episode. You can, once you're in it, it's almost like self-preserving. As long as you can get that balance and all those things, elements right, it goes on and on. You don't really tire. I mean, of course, eventually you're going to tire, but if the longer you can stay in that state. So I've done long distance running before. I've run quite a few 100-mile events, like where you have to go 100 miles. And let me tell you, learning how to preserve yourself and get into a state where you can be doing it in a way that it's not about self destruction and pain. I mean, there's a whole host of people, maybe they find flow in pain. For me, it's not that. It's about trying to find a state that a steady state that allows me to go on and actually really, instead of being a burden or miserable, I heard somebody say it's the hormetic threshold. When you pass the hormetic threshold, you have misery. That's when you no longer, stressors are no longer building you up and making you stronger and more vital, but they start breaking you down. Where that hormetic threshold is in asana, for example, you go in asana, at some point you need to get out of there. It's not going to be fun anymore. And you need to go to the opposite direction. That yin and yang, that back and forth, that middle ground, if you can get on the point of the axle, if you can sit at the center of it, the whole world is moving around you and you're just sitting there happy as a clam.
You both mentioned barefoot, and I, I also have the same experiences. I have found that the more tactile feedback that we have, it makes you can you can have the flow state at much slower. When you're on a skateboard and when you have things, wheels, rollerblades, I don't even want to get into video games. But when you have some sort of tool or you protect yourselves, like you need some sort of speed. Kayaks. I also like I kayaked for years in Texas too. Um, I enjoyed it because you were constantly reacting to whatever the river or the creek was throwing up at you. But I found that going barefoot, like it was one thing to run or to ride a bike through the desert, but then to go barefoot, or even when climbing, like I love to climb barefoot. Um, you have an unbelievable amount of sensory input that most people never have access to because their feet are always bound in socks
Oh,
or shoes.
amen. I mean, Lord have mercy. Look at your feet. Look at all your extremities. Look at all those nerve endings, folks. Look at all those nerve endings. Genitals, hands, head, and feet. That's where all the nodes end. And there's just so much. People would, oh, my feet, it's so many nerves, it hurts. That's literally information gathering in real time. And if you look at a human being, what is there? Why did Homo sapiens sapiens become so successful? They learned how to locomote over every nook and cranny of this planet on their own 2 feet. So, getting back to tapping into the basic 101 thing of a human being, you got to go outside and get in your bare feet. You got to have sun on you. You got to have fresh air around you. And why is beach culture ultimately? I mean, we might as well just go all the way. Why is beach culture so wonderful? Why is everybody feeling so damn good at the beach? You've stripped yourself down of all the accoutrements of civilization, and you've got back to a natural default state on your bare feet in an environment where being basically naked is enough. And more the so I seek out those kind of places too, where you can be closer to the original state of a human being. This is a very good place to begin to explore before you start adding all the other things that you need to add, from drugs to protections to things to try to make life easier. Why not investigate first what it's like to just be a human being in the human meat suit and realize your human feet are actually it's that's what human beings are successful. That's why we made it so far. So reconnect to that every day. I think that's kind of the hint, right? It seems like that's the underlying thing. You got to go outside. You've got to be somewhat vulnerable, and you've got to learn how to change your movement, your attitude, your state, so that your that vulnerability becomes something that's inspiring you to become competent in something that ultimately it becomes very musical, right? It becomes like, just like in music, you got to be able to find a way to get into the rhythm with others. Let's say if you're working in a group, you got to find, if you're singing, you got to find that place. But once it harmonizes, once it's in that zone, you just stick there as long as you can. And then, eventually it breaks up. You either get too tired, you run into a wall, you really do fall, whatever. In the end, the more you can stay in a state where what we're talking about, whatever that is, but many people can tap into something they've never tapped into or haven't for a long time by just literally going back to the default state of what is to be a human being. I think we're like preeminently excellent flow staters. I think all animals are when they're like, in that state. So we should probably do that more too.
Mondo, you mentioned balance earlier too, and I'm wondering whenever you're barefoot, I love balance too. I love slacklining. And I've slacklined a lot, and I find both climbing and slacklining and doing so barefoot that our feet have in our hands we have these oppositional, we have thumbs and our trigger finger, and then we have our ping feathers, as I like to call them, our ring finger, our middle finger, our pinky. But they run through different lines through our body, and the same holds true for our feet. And it's interesting to me that like I see people climb in climbing shoes, and they're very they take away this oppositional, this ability for opposition in their feet. And I think that people do it, it's something that we do walking. Yes, I mean, I understand shoes and wanting to protect ourselves from goat heads or, things that might be falling. But whenever you go barefoot a lot, you find this new track of balance through your body. Or at least I do. I wonder if you have the same experience.
Well, for me, yeah, one of the things I think of is you can do any, as long as you pay homage to the human body, right? If you start trying to, I don't know, if you don't understand it in its default state and you haven't appreciated it, I think when you start adding things, you might no longer be benefiting yourself, right? In other words, people, I think, got so disconnected from their body and they start trying to fix it, right? The first thing they want to do is find something they can buy to fix it. Footwear, for example. So in running, that's very common. What would happen is, oh, I must be, it's hard. I need to get something softer to land on. I need a cushion. And it just literally is counterintuitive. Your body suddenly no longer feels the impact. So it starts landing harder. And like people stop losing that connection to their own body, the proprioception. There's all, like, back to the idea, there's all this information your body is attuned to getting. And if you could pay attention to it, you as an individual could like change the state of where you're at. But if you don't have that information coming to you, if you cover your feet and you lose the feeling of impact, for example, in running, you literally start developing strides that human beings don't do if they don't have something that's blocking the information to them. And there's this Daniel Lieberman, evolutionary biological biologist at Harvard University, got really fascinated by this. I think I mentioned in the last talk. He created a treadmill that allows to pick up where people are landing and the impact forces. So first he would just take people and have them take off their shoes and make them run and just notice the variability of their stride patterns. And it's relatively, it's not really, it's pretty similar. Almost everybody's kind of falling in the same space. Put shoes on them, and suddenly the variability is just all over the place, because it's literally people have lost touch with the very thing that's allowing them to make those choices about how to move better. And so we had a whole movement, like people disconnected from the very basic thing. So I got into, when if I need to wear footwear, I definitely want to get something that's going to be along the lines of something that is allowing my foot to actually be a foot, not trying to like turn it into something else. The idea that, I don't know, back in the day, I think, people almost seemed like they'd want to chop the foot off and just put like a rubber something there. But when you look at the foot, Michelangelo Da Vinci looks at the foot and says, this is the preeminently engineered part of the human body. Just look at that thing. So anyway, I can go on and on about the foot, but I do believe there is a very important connection between the foot in particular and many of these flow states, because ultimately the default stance of a human being is on their own 2 feet, right? And then all those cool sports where you start gliding and flowing, I really think there's a connection between that feeling of gliding. So many people are so attracted to that recreational joy of skiing, of snowboarding, of roller skating, of rollerblading, all of that. And the more and more that you can bring that into your life, and at the same time making it so that it's less and less, right? As you get older, you really don't want to have situations where you're going to be injured. So that's where the mastery comes in. But once you master it and you've learned all the tricks, you can go to that state. You can go there. Like for me, I literally like leaving the door. My flow state starts, and when I get home, my flow state ends, in a sense. I can like, I've got it down like that. I don't want to wait for the wave. I don't want to wait for the mountain. I don't want to have to drive to get to where I'm going. I want to leave my door, and a barefoot run could do that. A skateboarding session could do that. And the thing that I'm really into, the solo wheel thing, I can get into that state instantaneously, basically now, and keep it, preserve it, and then bring it back into the other things that I'm doing. I just think it's so good to encourage people, whoever they are, wherever they are. In the end, really, if you go outside and move around, you're going to be better off than if you didn't do that. So if you're listening to this when we're done, you go out there and try it, okay?
You said solo wheel. What's this solo wheel?
Well, I got into that. It's a crazy device. They're also known as electric unicycles, EUCs or something like that. It's
Oh,
just
I've seen one. I haven't got to ride it yet, but I almost wanted to knock the rider off and
well,
and take a spin on it.
yeah, it's a little bit more complicated of a beast. It's kind of like an alligator. You better know how to, hold the snout down before you start playing around with it. Yeah, they kind of. So yeah, I'm really into them, actually, and the reason I'm into them is because they're very much a fascinating, like a dream vehicle for me. They are motorized. Yes, that's true, but they also have regenerative braking. So a whole new sport's happening. These big ones, they've gotten bigger and bigger. But the reality is, I'm into like the smaller ones that are lighter weight, because with this regenerating capacity, I am, like I mentioned in one of our recent talks, I literally am finding ways to use human movement to actually put energy back into the system as you're moving. So if you have regenerative braking, of course, if you're going downhill, you're already starting to charge your machine as you're riding, and that's already a joy. But I'm finding ways to flow. This becomes one of the very best I've ever found. It's in the sense that it's like I'm in a wave now. I'm in the curl now. Now I start directing that curl anywhere I want to go. And to me, that's like the dream state. And I got into it in Seattle in 2000. Well, I found it on an island off the coast of Istanbul. The first solo wheel just happened to be a guy had one on an island where cars weren't allowed in 2012. I was like, holy crap, what's that? I've never stopped playing with them. And indeed, I have all kinds of friends in the inventive spaces creating these things. I look forward to making more and more. Like the flow state, basically, people should be able to be, whenever they're moving through space and time, they should be able to be in a flow state. Yeah, I was part of that group right there that you're showing that back in the day. That's from probably 2016. I mean, it hasn't caught on for a variety of different reasons. But as you can see from my little talk here, I've got some, background in flow sports from a lifetime of playing. And I'm telling you, when it comes to feeling a flow sport continuously and in a useful way, I've never found anything better than this type of device. And I look forward to more of them. In the end, it's almost like before I found the solo wheel, and I was really into running, I was finding like I was really tapping into how can I get into this steady state and stay there longer and longer. And I was doing that, and I kind of just was really enjoying that. But then I started realizing when I saw the solo wheel for the first time, I realized now there's a vehicle once again paying homage to the human form. In other words, your form factor is a human being. You're not taking up any more space. Your postural position is the ideal position of your running, right? You basically you're keeping your torso is essentially staying stable, and your legs in a great running, from my mind, your legs and your turnover becomes the wheel. You are creating an energetic wheel as you're, and the more the smoother you can make that wheel, the more efficient you can make that wheel, the better and further you'll be able to go with the same amount of energy. And for any animal in the world, and a hunting animal at that, that's a hugely invaluable thing to be able to do. So human beings have very deep within them this need and this capacity to notice efficiency through flow, i.e., through smooth movement that's not wasting energy. That's really, I think, there's an element of not wasting energy that flow is all about. And instead, so with this wheel, you suddenly are in that same position, but now you're able to will yourself through space. I swear to God, it feels angelic. You're like, I always thought, like, what would an angel be like? Well, they would stand upright and they would just like, almost like Tadasana, the yoga position of it's called the mountain pose, and then just like decide where they want to go. And I kind of played around with that. I swear to God, you guys, it's so addictive. And I actually ultimately want to create a company called Uber Wheel. I mean, I already have the URL. And I really want to expand on the whole thing of electrified wheels for moving people around cityscapes. Because when you do that, like for example, when I lived in Seattle and I had my solo wheel, and that town is very tough to move around in because it's hilly, it's got corridors, but it's hilly, it's cold, it's dark, it's wet. When you had a solo wheel, the whole urban scape becomes a giant puzzle that you get to play in, and you never have that, oh my God, that god awful experience that is totally non flow, which is city traffic. What a god awful thing to give human beings to experience every day of their life. An absolute god awful experience to be totally out of flow. Terrible. You let people move in a city, you let them efficiently move in a city, you're going to have a prosperous, happy population doing all kinds of cool shit because flow in the world equals prosperity and flourishing. That's what flow is when it goes outside of the body and starts, actually taking all that spent built up energy and applying it to all the good stuff that we can do out in the world with other people. Come on, folks.
When you think about what humans do when they quote unquote go on vacation, this is exactly the thing that they seek for, right? What do we
Yep.
do on vacation? We go to the beach, where you said we're connected with our feet to the ground. We go skiing. We're in that flow state. You know, I go on a mountain biking trip. I go camping, whatever. We seek back for this state.
Yep.
It is a very important state for our psychology, and to relegate it to, you know, 1 week or 2 weeks out of the
Right.
year, this is not the way. This is not the correct behavior.
No, no. Basically every single, like, really basically every single day you should have elements that are, people need to find a way. I mean, it's your responsibility. If you're a human being, wherever you are, it's going to benefit you to, like, try to recreate aspects of this vacation, quote unquote, thing. There should be elements of every day where you're giving yourself some time to be able to, find a way to get outside. You're just going to have to do it if you really want to live life in a way that's going to be, like, really make you come alive. You're just going to have to go outside, and you're going to have to get vulnerable. I guess that's what it really comes down to. And then, the more you can do that, the better off you're going to be. At least that's the story of my life.
Yep,
So,
get on a pair of wheels, and if you can get on a mountain bike, if you can get on a razor scooter, if you can get on a mono wheel, if you can get on a slack line, something where your focus has to be there. Lucas, you were going to say something. Go for it.
well, I agree with all of that. Maybe get on the slack line before anything else. But when you, Mondo, when you were talking about skateboarding earlier,
Mhm.
and then this solo wheel, do you find a different experience whenever you're moving forward as opposed to when you're moving sideways? Because I think
Oh,
about the same, like with skiing and snowboarding. To me, they're kind of different experiences. Um,
Oh,
well,
good point.
on a skateboard and a solo wheel, you're always moving forward, no matter what
Well, yeah,
you're
but
doing.
there's wiggles, you guys. Okay, so that's a
There's
very
wiggles
different.
and there's grinds. Yeah, I guess
Yeah,
there's
okay,
a
but
little
I
bit
want
of
to
that
tell you
element
something
in
on this long distance thing. So I guess I can say I'm a master in this space. Okay, I guess now that I'm 60 years old, but I'm always one of the things. So I've actually created some world records in these sports. So for skateboarding, I created the world record 242 miles in 24 hours back in the day. I mean, it's been surpassed now, and other things. So I had to, like, really focus on what do you do to keep this efficiency and this flow. And absolutely wiggles are in it. Okay, so I'm always thinking about, and I also ride high wheel bicycles. I'm always putting wiggles. So when I'm riding down the road on a solo wheel, which, for all intents and purposes, many people just sit there and you just go, right? But what I'm doing is, not only am I bouncing up and down slightly, so there's the just getting, imagine that the tire is like a spring, right? It's got a little bit of, it's a pneumatic tire. So if you push down on it, it's springing. It'll spring you back up. You push down, it springs you back up. And then imagine creating kind of like a sine wave, like wiggles back and forth, because on the skateboard particularly, it's a wiggling motion, very much like a sperm, let's say. This wiggling motion, that dolphining, that's also called, that's a very much a flow state instigator. Okay, so you get that wiggling back and forth. And with my skateboard, it's called long distance pumping. Literally, that wiggling begins to propel the board forward. So it's like, oh my God, is that a good feeling, you guys? When you can wiggle your body in a certain way, at a certain tune, in a certain frequency that only you can feel, and you've got to master it. It's like getting your voice to tune in. And then when you get that, and you're propelling yourself forward through all these wiggles and jiggles and things that you're doing, Lord have mercy. That's a floor state right there.
so I used to swim. I used to swim too. The only reason I swam was because it kept the weight off, so I could jump higher playing volleyball. And I hated swimming. I absolutely hated it. But I was so bad at it that it kept the weight off, because I was a bull in a china closet moving through the water. But at one point, I quit trying to force myself through the water with big hand pumps and to do exactly that. One day I just got tired and I was like, well, I'm gonna move like a dolphin underwater and whatnot. And I found what you're talking about, Mondo. Like it opened the door for me to begin to swim for miles. And until I moved away from places with swimming pools, I was addicted for years afterwards. So
Yeah,
I
that's
get the
awesome. You know,
wiggle.
the wiggle jiggles, man. Just look at all the animals in nature. And back to like when you see them doing, like when you see a dolphin, like, Lord have mercy. So if you can find ways to do that yourself, it's going to be impossible not to want to keep doing that. It's just that it's addictive in that way. And I think it's a good addiction.
Well, should we leave it? Should we leave it at wiggles today? Wiggles and flow?
I can't even believe we ripped through this topic and we're at the top of the hour. It's every time Mondo you come on, I feel like we're in the flow state on the show. So thanks for coming. I think that's probably where we gotta leave it, Lucas. But love the topic. If you found this conversation somewhere and you loved what's going on, we talk about these kinds of subjects, lots of other stuff. Like and subscribe. You can find us on the FOMO Show on X and YouTube. So yeah, make sure you keep track of what we're doing because we love to have these kinds of conversations and hope you can join us again for some other conversation in the future.
Glad you came on, Mondo. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, guys.